When life gets unpredictable, preparation matters. In medicine, it's all about staying alert, ready for whatever comes through the door. On the road, it's no different. That's why Volvo designs vehicles to help anticipate risk, reduce harm, and protect lives. The Volvo XC90's advanced safety systems inspire confident decisions wherever the road takes you. The Volvo XC90, for life. Proud sponsor of the Pit Podcast. Learn more at volvocars.ca/safety.
You try and watch sports in this country, it's unavoidable, right? The advertising for gambling websites. Watch a hockey game, right? It's on the boards. It's on the ice. They go to commercial break. There's an ad for a gambling website. My goodness, gambling has really taken off. Legalization efforts in Canada and south of the border in the United States. Our next guest recently penned a piece in The Atlantic. It's titled "Legalizing Sports Gambling Was a Huge Mistake." Charles Fain Lehman joins us now. He's also a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Charles, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So we've got this issue in Canada. I was reading your piece, and I think it's like 38 of the 50 states in the U.S. have also legalized sports gambling. Tell us why, Charles, this has been a mistake.
Yeah, the useful thing about the way in which legalization works in the United States is that you can look at, because it rolled out over a number of years, you can look at states that have and have not legalized sports gambling before and after they legalized. And the social science that uses that fact is increasingly grim. I highlight some research in my piece which notes that following sports gambling legalization, people's risk of defaulting on credit goes up. The risk of bankruptcy goes up 25 to 30%. They find that for every dollar people spend on sports gambling, they forego $2 of investment, $2 of money into their investment account. And there's also evidence to suggest that there's a prior finding that on days when the home team loses unexpectedly in the NFL games, in football games, domestic violence goes up, and there's research that says that sports gambling exacerbates that effect. So the picture that it paints is one where sports gambling harms people's bottom lines, harms families, and those harms tend to accrue among the least well-off, the most precarious, those who can sort of least afford these harms.
So, Charles, in light of everything you've said, and if there is that evidence that exists, why do you think it's taken off? Why do you think legislators across your country and mine have said, hey, let's do this?
Well, at least here in the States, sports gambling legalization sort of snuck up on everybody. It was illegal at the federal level from 1992 until 2018, when our Supreme Court said that the law prohibiting it was itself against the Constitution. The sports books were aware of this. They'd been building up infrastructure for a long time, getting ready for this ruling. They thought they were going to win. And so when it became possible to run sports books, they were prepared to sort of swarm state legislatures and say, look, this is a great thing. It'll generate a lot of tax revenue for you. And really, there's no downsides. We're going to get people out of the illicit market and into our market. I think people bought the story because they didn't know about the international context. And anyone who says, don't legalize sports gambling is made to sound like a boring scold until we see what happens.
Well, but just on that one point, right? And honestly, it's a point that sways me in this country because the gambling would, like, if it wasn't legalized, well, the gambling would still be happening on these apps, on these websites, but the money would just be going offshore. Is there anything to that right now the cat's out of the bag? Everyone's got a smartphone in the pocket where it's so easy to bet. The question is, do you want it done legally or illegally offshore?
Yeah, I don't think that's strictly correct. There two things are true. One is that since legalization, the offshore sites are not taking big hits to their bottom line. People are still gambling on the illegal sites and on the legal sites. That's in large part because if the legal sites kick you off, you just go to the illegal sites. But the reality is that illegal businesses struggle to compete. They don't offer the same. They don't have access to the same technologies, the same means of advertising, the same legitimate access to the app store that legal businesses do. There's lots of barriers to illegal businesses, and so I think a much smaller population of consumers was accessing the illegal sites. They were there, they were real, but the marginal person is now much more likely to gamble because they're much more likely to be exposed to the possibility of gambling as opposed to having to seek it out.
We're with Charles Fain Lehman. He just penned a piece in The Atlantic on sports gambling. Charles, what about regulation as being perhaps a solution, maybe not to all the issues here, but some of the issues? North of the border here in Canada, there has been talk where we need to, let's say, ban the advertising, allow the apps to exist, but don't let them advertise nonstop throughout every sporting event. Can regulation be perhaps a partial solution to some of the issues you've outlined?
What I'd say is I'm certainly not going to say no to intelligent regulation. I've talked about a couple. I'd like you talked about advertising bans, at least here in the States, have majority support in polling. Another sort of more aggressive option is limiting the number of deposits that sports betting apps can take, or compelling them to do credit checks or background checks. And even more aggressive is shutting down apps altogether, requiring people to sports gamble in casinos. I think those would all be great. I think the industry is going to fight tooth and nail, and what they're going to say is, if you do that, you're cutting into our bottom line so aggressively that we can't continue to survive. I think they're probably right about that. And at that point, we should be asking if the only way to have a safe gambling industry is through all of these regulations that can be repealed by regulators who get captured by the industry. Why have an industry at all?
Well, and Charles, one of the things that you looked at in your piece was the notion where they say, well, listen, you legalize this gambling, think of all the tax revenue. The tax revenue will come in, and that's so good for governments and society. When you looked at that, what'd you find?
Yeah, the reality is it's pretty anemic. The best estimate is you're seeing something like $500 million a quarter, which is a lot of money to you or me, but it's not a lot of money over 38 states. For comparison, it's something like 0.5%. In New York State, something like 0.5% of their revenue comes from sports gambling versus 0.5% of the money they spend is what I mean to say. That's less money than the states make from alcohol, marijuana, tobacco. I mean, vice goods are never big generators. It's not nothing, but it's far less. It's not going to solve anybody's, big gaping budget hole.
You mentioned in your piece some of the outrageous figures, just how big the numbers are going up, what's being bet every year. I think you compared NFL seasons off the top of your piece as well. What can you tell us on just how pervasive it has become? Just how many people now are gambling?
Yeah, so I think something like a third of Americans report that they placed a bet. That's a substantial increase. You talked about the $35 billion season. That's the projection of the American Gaming Association. There's a Goldman Sachs estimate that suggests that gambling increased, the size of the market increased something like 20-fold in the first couple of years. That's a dramatic increase. It's now a $10 billion industry, and that reflects, on the one hand, it reflects the fact that a lot of people are gambling, but mostly it reflects the fact that they're really efficient at identifying the people that can make the most money off of, who are in many cases not the sort of people who should be placing bets, the people who are systematically disadvantaged in the way that I talked about earlier.
Do you think it's possible to put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube at this point?
Look, gambling is still illegal. Sports gambling is still illegal in 12 states, including the two biggest, California and Texas. Those two alone are 60 million people. That's a fifth of the U.S. population, a little bit less, but who do not have access to sports gambling. So it's not all the way out yet. And the other thing is, the U.S. passed a federal sports gambling ban in 1992. That's not that long ago. When it did it with the support of every major sports league, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, all of them testified in favor of the regulation, which suggested that, at the time, it was pretty popular because they thought it was corrupting the game. I think they're probably right about that. I think that's evidence that, no, you could totally put the toothpaste back in the tube as people wake up to the costs and recognize that there aren't that many benefits for the cost. I think there's pretty serious agitation about the situation, desire to do something.
Charles, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you for coming on for the discussion. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed your piece. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Charles Fain Lehman. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. His latest piece in The Atlantic is called Legalizing Sports Gambling Was a Huge Mistake.